Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Bold prediction. This episode is going to be Evan's equivalent of Tarek Skubal's complete game shutout Maddox with 13 strikeouts. No pressure.
What's the podcast equivalent of throwing absolute gas 103 to close out the episode?
Just no one can refute any of your points. Every time you talk, we're all just in stunned silence because we can't disagree with any of it.
Evan's just going to do a 10-minute monologue about all the reasons the Detroit Red Wings should give Sam Bennett $10 million.
He's just going to rattle off the entire free agency and hit every single contract bar for bar, predict it now, full Lobstradamus months in advance.
I will try my best.
Really inspiring confidence.
Oh, yeah.
For the people out there, pal.
I take back my prediction. He doesn't have it today.
It might be.
I only recognized a couple words from your analogy anyways, so it was going to be very difficult for me to hit that.
There's 3 runners on base, 2 runs already scored. We're not even one out in the first inning. This is going devastating. All right, folks, as you've been able to tell, fresh off of watching Tarek Skubal pitch his first ever complete game for the Tigers, and then rushing back home to record, we have Max Bultman of The Athletic Detroit in for this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. We're here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, debating which contract overpay would be better or worse, if at all, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
I'm Max Bultman.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking to you, like I said, about free agency and getting Max's take on things. There have been a couple potential overpay contracts floating around the league in terms of what it would take to get Marner and Sam Bennett, both players we've been talking about a lot. So we're going to dive into whether those would be worth it for Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings, some other Red Wings news, Red Wings affiliate news, and more before we jump into the world of international hockey, as the IIHF World Championships are going to be wrapping up sometime as we record, we think. The Stanley Cup Playoffs, updates from there as the Florida Panthers continue to be the Florida Panthers. Potentially, Edmonton, Dallas will be wrapping up as we're recording this episode. We're going to get into more NHL news, prospect profiles, a discussion on who could potentially fall to the Red Wings, and more before we jump into overtime. Very quickly, before all that, the Winged Wheel Podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. You get access to benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, we have fun. Evan gives us thoughts with Evan. He actually, if you want to hear the most unhinged Evan ever is, it's on those episodes. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. We give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game in season directly to our Patreon supporters. And in the off season, we have a lot planned. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Max, we have to start with you. The discourse around Red Wings free agency. Do you think this is all for naught because it's going to be decided by the teams who, those players currently play for, the potential unrestricted free agents? Or do you think the Red Wings are actually potentially working with enough here where they can land a big fish or two? What do you see coming?
It's a great question. I mean, certainly there are some of these guys who you feel like we're going to spend the next 5 weeks talking about them, and then you're going to hear on June 23rd or whatever that Gavrikov signed an extension in LA and Bennett signed for some ungodly cheap number in Florida. And then it's just kind of all or nothing on a Marner or an Ehlers or an Ekblad or something. And it, all of a sudden those players are going to have triple the amount of serious suitors because of how thin the market is. And that's the scary thing about free agency is you zero in on this small amount of players, and it's how you can make your mistakes is when the market thins and you go, well, I have to get desperate. And, it's a good debate to have, frankly. Are the Red Wings in a position where they can justify an at-all-cost signing? With how frustrated everybody is, you would think yes, but it's still a scary proposition.
Well, why don't we talk about whether this is the right year or not? Shayna Goldman of The Athletic actually wrote an interesting article, which brings up a good point. The 2025 UFA class obviously has some big names. Mitch Marner, Nikolaj Ehlers, Aaron Ekblad, Gavrikov, Sam Bennett, a lot of players in a lot of different tiers. But the 2026 class also has a lot of big names coming up. And these names could quickly fall off the board the moment we hit July 1, because then they're eligible to extend these players their contracts. But, taking out or suspend disbelief for a second, I should say. Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, Jack Eichel, Artemi Panarin, Kyle Connor, very relevant for Red Wings fans' interests, Matthias Ekholm, Stolars if you want to look at goalies, Kempe, Nachas, Alex Tuck, Connor Garland, Rasmus Anderson. Like, there are a ton of names out there. And I mean, we're not going to disillusion ourselves into thinking Connor McDavid's going to go anywhere other than Edmonton, barring something crazy happening. Jack Eichel, you'd have to imagine the same for Vegas. Kirill Kaprizov, Minnesota seems hell-bent on paying him, but there are a ton of names. Like, even if you get down to that next tier, so to speak, Kyle Connor, does Artemi Panarin leave New York? Are you better off waiting till 2026?
Isn't that the exact same story? Like, we're down to just 3 names there by that point. Like, once the big guys are there, you're still just, and Connor's great, Kempe's great, Natchez is great, but we're still pretty much, those are the only 3 that get me super pumped. A 34-year-old Artemi Panarin doesn't get me that excited in the same way some of those other guys do. And that's the peril of free agency, is you get excited a year out. And, at this time a year ago, weren't we talking about, Leon Draisaitl is only 1 year away, and that vanished very quickly. And that's the scary part. I mean, a lot of teams that do invest in a big way in free agency, they do it because they know they're going to make the most in those first 3 or 4 years. And the Red Wings have a ton of urgency. They need to do something in the next 3 or 4 years. They need to get in the playoffs in the next 3 or 4 years. But like, if I'd put the question to you, Brad, like, are the Red Wings going to do anything in the next 3 or 4 years that would to justify the kind of investment that it takes in free agency? You wouldn't be sure that they are. That's for sure, right?
No, they're far from a guarantee. There's always a chance. They're close, but what are these free agents looking at? Making the playoffs or potentially winning a cup? And those are 2 very, very, very different answers. If we fast forwarded 4 years and you told me the Red Wings made the playoffs 3 times, I wouldn't be surprised at all. If you told me they won multiple playoff rounds, I'd be extremely surprised as things stand right now. The pitch the Red Wings make to these free agents is, you are what puts us over the hump. We're right on the cusp. Are players going to buy that? Probably not. You look at traditionally in free agency, there's 4 factors that you always hear swaying a player to go to a team. 1, that team wins a lot. It's not the Red Wings yet. 2, taxes. Michigan ain't cheap on taxes. 3, weather, location. We love Detroit, but you compare it to a lot of other markets in the team, let's call a spade. They're not jumping to the top. 4, family. There are some players that have ties to Michigan, and we've seen it with DeBrincat. That has been a draw for them. But that is very situational dependent. I think we were talking about it before we were recording. The only free agent of significance this year that has any Michigan, Detroit-ish ties could be Aaron Ekblad, because he's got a lot of family in the Windsor area. Again, one player. You tell me the Red Wings win multiple playoff rounds after signing one of the big 5 free agents this summer, and then, Danielson, all those guys graduating. Now I'm not surprised, but yeah, it's not going to be these 3 to 4 years unless they are able to convince one, if not multiple, of these guys to come to Detroit on a promise that we will be good.
But it is a chicken or the egg thing, because if you don't bring somebody in, you're talking about wasting 3 or 4 years of Dylan Larkin, and that is almost just as indefensible as getting a contract and then not making the most of it. Like, you'd be not making the most of that contract at that point. And arguably the same with Raymond and Seider. You have these amazing values on them. Like, take advantage now before you're paying these guys $10 million. Like, there's a reason that people hate to be in the middle. And it's this exact feeling of, like, you either have to spend to get in, but not necessarily be sure you're going to win a Stanley Cup, or you have to wait and you're wasting hugely valuable years of your best players. It is a horrible spot to be in. And there's not an obvious easy way out unless you're the New York Islanders and you win a draft lottery or whatever.
The same thing that's hurting the Red Wings in these, upcoming years, with all the teams competing now having a ton of salary cap to convince these players to stay or go to their teams instead. Detroit no longer has that advantage over cap crunch teams who have been competing for the cup or in the playoffs year over year recently. But you look at it realistically, what you guys are alluding to, you're not really going to, nail everything in one fell swoop. By that, I mean, like, get 2-3 major guys in one off season, and that's okay. Go for it in 2025 and go for it in 2026 is my answer, because what Max opened with is correct. Like, a lot of those names are going to be off the board before we're even opening or puck drop next season. So there's no point in waiting. And he's right. Like, we are now on a Larkin clock that isn't ticking and then he expires, but you are running out of his best years. You have to be able to do something to push you a little bit more. And the hope is it's the domino effect. You get a little bit better this year, and then you're the Montreal for the next playoffs. And then, wow, there's a lot of excitement around Detroit. And look at the energy in that arena. And, Seider and Raymond and Edvinsson and Kasper have taken yet another step, and guys are excited to go and play with them. And all of a sudden, when Larkin's going to All-Star games, he actually is convincing players to come. And then maybe in a year, you're talking Kempe and another player, and Anderson, for example. Like, the one simple solution is the easy answer in fans' minds because they want everything to be fixed fast. But that's just not the way the NHL works. So the pressures are to do this quicker, in my mind. And that comes from the fan base being impatient because they've been, it's not even fair to call it impatient. They've sucked forever. And if you're waiting, you're wasting Larkin's years. And you want to get on this before other teams figure out their cap situations and can take advantage of it in even higher and higher cap as the time goes on.
Yeah, you want to become a desirable destination as quickly as possible. Obviously, like Brad said, Detroit doesn't have the weather or the income tax, but if you can lure guys to come, like Steve Yzerman's still the GM of this NHL team, and that means something. Like, Steve Yzerman as a GM and as a player means something. You've got a guy like Patrick Kane who's in Detroit because he wants to be there. That means something. And you've got all these young guys who look like they're promising. You've got to use that as leverage in these free agent conversations. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of these free agent guys probably want a big ticket. So you're going to have to get uncomfortable with the salary amount. There's a high chance that what you end up paying them in term and dollars is not going to be great, but you've got to get the ball rolling. And if it takes a little bit of extra money or an extra term, but it gets you out of this mushy middle, I think that's a risk worth taking.
This might be talking out of school. I don't know the answer to this, but like, is there any argument though that even if Michigan doesn't have the tax advantage of like a Miami, a Fort Lauderdale, or Tampa, like the cost of living would be lower? Like, there's got to be some argument to that.
Yeah, you have to imagine that this is, like, you're not going to have the extremely high taxes of California. Obviously, you don't have California weather. And I mean, I know Detroit is the butt end of a lot of jokes, and we all here think unfairly. Like, people often don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about Detroit. But Michigan has some of like the wealthiest and nicest to live places in not just the Midwest, but America. And that's not a secret, because that's obviously guys are going, it's very rarely that guys go in and live like right downtown by the arena, which is still amazing for Detroit. But yeah, like, it's cheap to live. You can live really well. You can have the peace and quiet. This isn't exactly Manhattan. Not every player in the league is going to want that kind of thing. And you won't live anonymously. That's not how it happens in Michigan, but you can live very, very, very comfortably. And your dollar, and it's not like Michigan has, 10, 11, 12% income tax either. So
it's also some of the best, if not the very best facilities in the NHL. Like, I don't want to sell the Red Wings sales pitch short here. I think the Red Wings are maybe not a destination on the tier of the contenders in the perfect weather, no tax states. Like, I'm not going to say they're a Vegas or a Dallas or a Florida or a Tampa, but I also don't think they're at the bottom. I would be surprised if they're on many no trade lists, for example. And I think that usually correlates reasonably well to free agent success.
I would imagine they're somewhere in the mushy middle in terms of your tier list, right? Like, if you're a golf guy, I think Michigan is right up there too. So yeah, I think there's lots of amazing things. Like, us three are not from Michigan, but I think we'd be the first three to say that people's idea of what Michigan and what Detroit is completely wrong. Like, it's an incredible place. There's lots of great selling points that the Red Wings could use.
So, I mean, we talked about selling points. Actually, very quickly, Carolina and Vancouver, for example, constantly ribbed on their facilities. The LCA is recognized as one of, if not the best facility in the NHL. And like Max said, I really don't think you can overstate that if you try. Like, that is going to sell some players, maybe players coming from those teams as well. So
connected practice rink. Like you can leave your bag in the same room all the time. Like, I mean, not that they're the ones who have to handle that, but you're going to the same place every day. Everything's on site. I mean, visitors, like they have a great visitor setup. And even from that alone, I think people will already kind of understand intuitively what's going on there.
Well, I always think of the Maple Leafs. Their practice arena, in theory, is 20 minutes away from I guess what they call it, Scotiabank Arena now. But with Toronto traffic, like you're looking at minimum 40 minutes. Like that's a big thing. Like the ability to just go up and down a floor from your practice rink to the LCA, like it's incredible.
That was the exact point I was going to make, was as someone who goes to both Toronto and Detroit frequently, the traffic is such an underrated thing because you can get anywhere in Detroit fairly easily and it's a great drive. Toronto's an hour from Toronto. Like unless you are living walking distance from the arena, it's going to be a headache every time you have to go there.
Yeah, and if you have to take the TTC in Toronto, you might run into Willie Nylander recording an AirPods ad, and that's just uncomfortable for everyone, so you don't want that.
If only there was a Toronto-based free agent that everyone had interest in.
All right, let's get into that. Now, we've been doing the whole Marner and what would it take to get him, and it seems more and more not a surprise to anyone that he's going to test the market. And there were things that came out where it's like incidents, without going into a lot of detail about, Marner being uncomfortable with how much his family was pulled into things, and incidents with fans. And there was rumors online, whether it was like leaked addresses or like being harassed, that kind of thing. It seems like what we see on screen is also what's happening behind the scenes. The guy is interested in discovering what else is out there, to put it gently. I believe LeBrun reported on TSN that of many teams, Detroit is one of the ones that are interested in Marner. Again, that's not news. 31 other teams are probably going to do some due diligence here to some degree. But the Mitch Marner number that everyone has in their heads is 14 million, because that's just like the arbitrary number for a player of his caliber with a rising cap. Now, I compare that to some of the news that came out on Sam Bennett. And I want to qualify this by saying it's early. We are in the season of agents pushing out stories that are advantageous for their players and other teams wanting to stir the pot. So be wary of what, agendas might be out there. But Brad has been saying for a long time, Sam Bennett is probably the player that is going to be most overpaid or cash out the most in this free agency based on what he's doing this past season and in the playoffs. $10 million was the number that was put out there on a contract for Sam Bennett, in terms of, potentially one team reportedly being willing to pay that number. And so the question I've put out there, and I pose to you two, is imagine a world where you are forced to sign one, we'll call it overpay, whether it's 14 million by 7 for Marner or 10 million by 7 for Bennett or something to that effect. Which one would serve the Red Wings better? And are either of them worth that money? Start with Max.
First of all, I'm going to believe it when I see it on both of those numbers. Are you really telling me that Mitch Marner is going to be the highest paid or tied for the highest paid player in the NHL, and some team is going to sign off on that? Like, he's really good. That's Leon Draisaitl's contract. He does not have Leon Draisaitl's position at center. He does not have Leon Draisaitl's MVP. Just one for right now. Could be two. And he does not have Leon Draisaitl's playoff track record, right? Like, I have a hard time. Mikko Rantanen got 12 flat, right? It's plenty of a margin for the UFA gap versus the extension gap to get 13 million. That's where I would want to do it at, is 13. I think 14's being a little over extreme for even for the rising cap. Sam Bennett, like $10 million. Are you serious? 10 million. Like, he's been fantastic for the Panthers. And it one reason that I think that Sam Bennett, the playoff performance that he's had right now is not the first time. People will look at him and say this is a proven playoff performer, but his career high in the regular season is still 51 points. And if you're signing him, you're not really signing him for the 51 and the 82. You're signing him for the 15 or 20 points he's going to get you in the next 20 games of that season, which, granted, you kind of have to know you're going to play those 20 games to feel really, really good about. But are you telling me that a guy whose career high is 51 points is getting $10 million? Again, I'll believe that when I see it. That being said, my answer to the question is Marner, because of what I just said. And I don't know that the Red Wings know that they're going to play the amount of playoff games needed to get that 10. Sam Bennett's worth $10 million to the Florida Panthers because they know they're in that many games. And he's going to produce in those games, and that's when they want it the most. Granted, Florida wouldn't have to pay him that much because they have all these advantages we talked about earlier. But the Red Wings don't know that they're in that number of games. So for that reason, I would say Marner, but I don't believe in either of those figures.
I'll push back on one thing there before letting Brad and Evan jump in. I do think there's a team out there who will pay Mitch Marner $14 million, and it's the team that everyone's defaulting Marner to. The ones who are going to want to sell a whole lot of new jerseys and want to excite people about an updated arena. It's the Utah Mammoth. And it would give Marner the anonymity. It would give Marner a market that would embrace him and forgive him for whatever sins happen on the ice because they're just happy to have, their first premier superstar there. No offense to any of the former Coyotes players. And Ryan Smith's not afraid to spend money. So I see Marner and the Utah Mammoth as being an obvious but very compelling fit.
Great fit, but are you making him the highest paid player, tied for the highest paid player in the league?
That'd be a selling point for ownership in Utah. I think they'd be proud of that. I think they would sell that to their fans. Be like, we went out there, we got this guy. We're not scared of the cap. We'll figure it out. Is it the smartest hockey ops thing? No, but when is the best time to make the not smartest hockey ops decision in terms of contracts? It's literally this juncture, this point in time in the salary cap era.
And those two guys you mentioned, Max, like they didn't hit the open market. There wasn't the chance for people to get crazy and do crazy things. Like they didn't see the 30 other teams lining up for Leon Draisaitl and Mikko Rantanen, whereas Mitch Marner is going to have 32 teams. The Toronto will try and keep him, I would imagine, at least put an offer out there. But there's going to be a team like Utah, maybe it's even the Islanders. They do something crazy and the number will just, I have a feeling the number on Marner is going to get crazy.
Well, it's easy to look at everything in a league-wide comparison, and I'm trying my best to stop doing that because I'm very, very guilty of it as well. If you're the Detroit Red Wings, or Utah or the Islanders, these all make sense. Are you better off with Mitch Marner overpaying him $1 or $2 million a year, or are you better off without him at all? And you get to the conversation again of can beggars be choosers? There will be memes. Oh my God, the Red Wings made Mitch Marner the highest paid player in the league and all that. But do you know what the bright side of that is, or the silver lining on that? You have Mitch Marner, who is going to put up probably pretty close to double the points Sam Bennett will in the regular season. Obviously, the intangibles is a whole nother conversation, and obviously all of those are in Sam Bennett's corner. But again, if you believe in your culture, you believe in your locker room, you believe we can fix him, you got to take the gamble, right? And the other part of this too, and Detroit probably has the best example of this, the players of Mitch Marner's skill level age better. You look at Panarin still producing in the Rangers. Patrick Kane, Mitch Marner's not Patrick Kane, but similar-ish players. Patrick Kane's coming off a hip resurfacing surgery, is in over 35 years old, and he's still producing at a great level. Why? Because his base of talent and his hockey IQ are that high that he is still a useful player. And he was never a Selke candidate. Mitch Marner is. So how many players on Sam Bennett's end of the scale who play that rough style, who don't have that supreme talent, they make it work based on hard work, playing aggressive, playing physical. That takes a toll on the body. I think you sign either of these guys to a massive overpay in the next 2 to 3 years, you are thrilled either way. But the back half of those contracts, I think Mitch Marner's is going to be a lot more palatable than Sam Bennett's is. You could be looking at a $10 million, 30-point player in 3 years. Like, that's the big risk there.
That's the most depressing thing you've ever said on the show.
That said, he is the better fit for them today. There's
Correct.
no question Bennett's the better fit for them today.
Yes.
I like stylistically, right? But you're right. I mean, you could be giving him the Jamie Benn contract to be half of Jamie Benn, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the Red Wings are in that position of they don't need the guy to get them through yet. They need the guy to get them there. Again, it's a conversation I'm having with my Leaf fan friends all the time. They're like, man, why do you want Mitch Marner so bad? He's just going to disappoint you in the playoffs. And all I hear is playoffs. And I'm like, yeah, let's get there first, then we can deal with that. And again, just players of his talent don't come available, right? If tomorrow we're overpaying Sam Bennett by $3 million a year or Mitch Marner by $2 million a year, I'm happy either way because that's a huge upgrade on the roster. But if we're looking at what's prudent to win a Stanley Cup with this team, and look at Washington, look at St. Louis, look at some of these teams who it took 6, 7, 8, 9 kicks at the can before they finally got it. You want the player that's going to keep that window open the longest. I know they're not similar stylistically, but a lot of the same narratives around Mitch Marner right now are the same narratives that were around Alex Ovechkin. And they got there. He figured it out. He won a Conn Smythe. It took a while. It took a lot of kicks at the can. So I'm still making decisions on not the next 3 years, but in the window of this contract, what's maximizing our odds. And if I got to overpay anybody, I'm overpaying the guy who's keeping that open longer.
You did make mention of, do you believe the Red Wings have the culture in the locker room to absorb the Mitch Marner baggage? I will ask you to answer that question rather than it being rhetorical.
Right now, I do not.
He is having a scuba episode.
Yeah.
Hold on. That was unreal.
Let him cook.
That's a good point. Right now, no. I don't think the Red Wings have a very mentally strong locker room. We've seen that with the continuous March collapses. But what I think doesn't matter.
Well, extend the collapse into April now. In May. This will be great.
Exactly. But if Steve Yzerman believes he can build the culture, then he's not as worried about the Mitch Marner baggage.
I also think the Red Wings have on the way players who will be better in the playoffs than they will be in the regular season. I think MBN is all day that kind of guy, that kind of Bennett thing where what he does in the regular season is going to elevate and he's going to score more. That already happened this year for him. I think you could see the same with Kasper, and he might also score quite a bit in the regular season. So I think they do have some of those guys in their pipeline already that could kind of counterbalance that out. They're not the stars today, but they could be. And frankly, we don't know. Raymond and Larkin both strike me as guys who will elevate in the playoffs.
I think for me, the whole conversation between exactly Sam Bennett and exactly Mitch Marner is very much a chicken and the egg thing. It's like, do you want the guy who performs in the playoffs but has, a very average regular season, which would actually put him 5th in Red Wings scoring if he had 50 points? Or do you want the guy who's a 100-point player in the regular season but disappears in the playoff and it's unknown if he'll ever figure that out? I mean, 100-point players you'd think would eventually figure it out, but to me, that's what the argument is. So for the Red Wings, whatever they think and what their philosophy is in constructing a team that's going to, be a contender, for me, it's either or. And if we really want to solve this argument, just sign them both.
Yes, that's the real answer here. And we keep talking stylistically too, and I feel it's probably prudent to point out that from the intangible standpoint and the Steve Yzerman vision, Sam Bennett does fit more. Obviously, he's got all the intangibles you want, the 200-foot game, the snarl they look for. But one thing the Red Wings are lacking pretty desperately, at least at a high-end level outside of Patrick Kane, is an elite playmaker. They have a lot of guys who can really shoot the puck, and if you want to factor in MBN and maybe even Buchelnikov, a couple more on the way, someone's got to get them the puck, right? Marner's that guy. You put Marner opposite a DeBrincat on the power play or opposite an MBN on the power play. You can move Lucas Raymond over to the left side. Changes the dynamic of this team completely because then it's not always running through Patrick Kane. You can give teams different looks.
Also, you have to plan for the day that Patrick Kane is no longer a Red Wing, as much as nobody really wants to think about that. The guy's getting old. You can say, yeah, you can't have this many wingers in your top 6, but how many years of Marner's 7-year deal or whatever it's going to be would Kane even still be on the roster for? Probably no more than 2, maybe. 2. Once you're getting past 2, you're already getting pretty bold. And then DeBrincat has a contract that ends in 2 years. And while I do think he will stay, I don't know that we can take it as a complete given when you talk about whether to try or not to try to sign one of the 10 or 15 best players in the world. It's also to your point, Brad, stylistically, it's not just the playmaking. Mitch Marner gets on Selke ballots pretty regularly. So if you're talking about who to play with Dylan Larkin and Lucas Raymond, yeah, Mitch Marner is not going to be that ace forechecker that Sam Bennett is, but he gives you probably at least as much help getting that line to tilt the ice better than Bennett. And stylistically, I think that's a good balance off, a trade-off, I should say.
Yeah, that's if you don't have that guy, that Marco Kasper archetype of just, he's going to go in and win every damn battle and, the exact type of player we're talking about. But it helps if you have 3 forwards on that line who are all plus defensively. You don't need necessarily a crash and bang type guy if you're just controlling the puck constantly, having good back checks, having good awareness, and just controlling play because you're good in every area of the ice, and all three guys can do it.
And Max, in a recent article, you talked about other free agents because, I mean, again, we can't say the most likely thing is that the Red Wings land neither of these guys and then not give more time to those free agents. We talked about Gavrikov a lot last episode, but Aaron Ekblad is a guy we were talking about before we hit record here. There's also, Ivan Provorov probably doesn't get brought up enough as a potential option. Dante Fabro as a sneaky option. And at forward, you mentioned guys like Brock Nelson, Brock Boeser, Brad Marchand is a guy we've talked to. Not that we're trying to add more Brads into our Red Wings universe here, but Brad Marchand could be a guy as well. Are there any other guys, Nikolaj Ehlers, of course, any of these guys where you think stylistically fit in terms of the contract and, any kind of likelihood or lack of a barrier to them coming to Detroit where you're kind of zeroing in on that aren't the big names here?
Everyone I put on that list has at least some selling point, right? Brock Boeser is going to score you a bunch of goals. He's a heavier body. He's not the fleetest of foot. That makes me question, is the forecheck fit actually as perfect as you would want it to be? Nikolaj Ehlers, the speed factor, I think would look great next to Larkin and Raymond, but he doesn't have that, heaviness factor on the forecheck. Unlike Marner, he doesn't have that, defensive ace status to him, so that maybe fits more the criticism of another small winger, but he's a really good player. He's almost a point per game winger with great speed. So I don't think you should rule him out off of that. I'm trying to remember who all I had on that list, but Bowen Byram, in Buffalo, I think is an interesting one. I know you guys talked about him at length last episode, so we don't have to rehash that. Generally, I think your conversation was spot on about him and the pros and the cons to it. So the one thing on that list, I had a couple trade guys, and Byram was one. So was Chris Kreider. And I would be curious to hear your guys' thought on this because Kreider had a bad year. He had a down year. He was, what do they call it when the guy has a bunch of goals and not many assists? That's the Cy Young. Yeah.
Cy
So
Young.
he had that kind of year, sticking with the Tarek Skubal theme of today's show. But he is a goal scorer. He is a big body. He has a history of being a guy who can win at the net. He's got some speed to him still, even at a more advanced age. And you could probably get him cheaper than anyone else we're going to talk about. The contract is 2 more years at $6.5 million, and I bet you New York's not going to pay you to take it, but I bet you could get that for a 3rd-round pick. And if you could do that, that's not a bad, bridge to Michael Brandt-Signigaard.
That last point you made is the exact critical point for me. I love the theory of Chris Kreider. If you just plucked him off the Rangers and dropped him on the Red Wings today, the Red Wings are better off for it, even in the middle of his decline, even at $6.5 million. The Red Wings have cap space to go. It's a short-term contract, not a whole lot of risk there, depending how much other cap space you use in free agency if you get a Marner, etc. Are you paying the value of name recognition with Chris Kreider, and is that what the New York Rangers are pushing, or are they going to be realistic about the situation? Because if they're we're not retaining $1, you can just have him, great. If they're we're going to retain $2 million, but you're giving us 1/3, great. But if they're no, this is Chris Kreider, are you kidding me? We want a 2nd-round pick and a prospect? Absolutely not.
I don't think they can afford to draw that line because they have RFAs they have to get done. And I don't think, now, granted, Steve Yzerman doesn't sound like he's going to be the guy to slip an offer sheet under Will Cooley's door or Keandre Miller's door, but somebody's gonna. And if they don't move Chris Kreider, that becomes a problem for them.
Yeah, it's a combination of that, and the theory is essentially everything's rotten in New York right now. We've been saying that forever too, and I to some degree, I know it's idealistic, but you also have to think that, right? Everything has been rotten in New York, and enough has come out to show why behind the scenes, it wasn't exactly a focused team, and it's chaotic, and the theory there works. And I look at the other guys I listed too. I think Brock Boeser is a guy we talked about early. Still a name that drives me insane because I think there was a point in time where you could have had him pretty close to free from Vancouver before he really turned it on. But that's a guy out there where it's yeah, you could fill in some decent years before more help comes in the pipeline. What he'll command, I don't know. I think it would be probably one of those contracts that if you compare to current salary, it'd be a little bit rich for your blood, but in 3 years, you look at what the effective salary is and you're oh, X million turns into X million minus 3 million or whatever it might be. So Brock Boeser is another guy where Is it a perfect fit? No. Is it guaranteed like Kreider that he comes in and does the same thing in Detroit? No, but there's enough there where I'm compelled by it. And I think, as Brad said, that would be a net addition to the Red Wings.
Would you give up something for Mason Marchment? That's another like trade one. Like Dallas has a lot they got to get done this summer. They got to move probably more than one guy out. Matt Dumba would stand out as a guy to move. I don't think that's a particularly fit for Detroit. But Mason Marchment would be a way for them to clear some money. 20-goal scorer, big body. I don't know if it's ideal on the first line, but he could play there.
What's the contract status on him? Because again, theory of Mason Marchment's great.
2 years, $4.5 million each.
Oh God, yeah, you do that all day. Under $5 million for a 20-goal scorer.
Well, you'd take it, but I'm saying you'd give up like a second and a prospect or something.
Yeah, 100%. I think the Red Wings are still in the category of first rounds are untouchable because even with a Mason Marchment, that could still be in the lottery drawing. Not likely at that point, but you're not getting rid of it yet. But in theory, a guy like Mason Marchment and one or two other additions to this team, and all of a sudden that second round pick is pick number 50, pick number 55, somewhere in that range, ideally. That's not super valuable to where they're at right now. It's not nothing, but for a player of that caliber, you would absolutely do it.
The other guy I was curious about in Dallas is Michael Granlund. Like, he had 22 goals again in the regular season. He's over half a point per game in the playoffs on a stacked Dallas team. You know, he's a little bit older. He's in his 30s. I think he's like 33, 32, something like that. So he's always been a gamer. I'm curious what your guys' initial thoughts are on that. And I know it all comes down to contract, but maybe we just talk about the player and maybe a fit in Detroit first.
He should have been on my list. That's a miss by me. You're right. Like,
sorry, Max.
No, you're right. You're spot on. Like, that's another name that should have been on there. I probably should have put him on there instead of Matt Duchene, who I think Matt Duchene's way more likely to stay in Dallas than Granlund. And, you know, Granlund, I think he's another smaller player. So that's kind of sticking with the theme of like, how much of that trade-off are you willing to make? But you're talking about a guy who's put up consecutive 60-point seasons. Like, that should be a player that you at least make a phone call on, especially if you can get it on a 2 or 3 year deal.
Evan he's sent the skipper back to the dugout after a rough first inning, and we're through 4 here, and he's put away a lot of guys swinging. What a comeback game so far. There are a ton of names that we're going to continue to talk about. We are going to switch over to some Red Wings system news. We should have mentioned last episode, congratulations to Muskegon, who won the title in the USHL. There was actually quite a few overtimes to talk about there. We talked about it in a Patreon exclusive, but unreal for Muskegon fans. And then you head over to the Toledo Walleye. They are in the Kelly Cup finals in the ECHL. So not the Red Wings, not the Griffins, but as you head through the Red Wings system with the Walleye and Michigan hockey in general, there is a lot to be excited about there. So best of luck to Toledo. And some congratulations are in order to Dylan and Kenzie Larkin, who welcomed their first child into their family, which I think every Red Wings fan and fans across the hockey world were thrilled to see. Congratulations to the Larkins. Hopefully everyone's happy and healthy, and all our best to them. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on the Winged Wheel podcast, and when we're back, plenty more. First, a word from our sponsors back after this. What can happen in 3 to 6 months? You could pick up a new hobby and realize it's not for you. You could spend 3 to 6 months debating who to draft at 13th overall and still be split by draft day. Or you could actually do something for yourself and start seeing thicker, fuller hair grow back with Hims. Honestly, that's not a bad trade-off. Hims provides you with convenient access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. It's super easy, no weird in-person appointments or sketchy products from mystery websites. Hims uses legit, doctor-trusted options with ingredients that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. You can pick the format that works best for you, chewables, sprays, pills, whatever fits into your routine. And because it's 100% online, the whole thing is low effort. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, so it's not just you figuring this out. Lots of guys are getting ahead of it and feeling better about how they look. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/wingedwheel. That's HIMS.com/wingedwheel for your personalized hair loss treatment options. HIMS.com/wingedwheel. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Welcome back. the IIHF World Championships, a ton of stories in there. I think we have to open with the fact that Tage Thompson just scored the golden goal. What is that? The first gold medal for the States in 90 years or something?
92 years.
Unbelievable. You said it between takes here. Tage has to be on the Olympic team now. Like you're not going to make that mistake twice.
Yeah, he's versatile. I mean, I'm not saying he's going to be your ace penalty killer, but he's a big body who skates great, who scores big goals. There's so many ways. How much would you have loved to have had Tage Thompson to bump up to the top line in that Four Nations championship game when Tkachuk got hurt? Instead, you were flexing different guys around. It's Brock Nelson. Like, Tage Thompson gives you a lot more sizzle when you do that.
Unbelievable story for him, who, like, he had to have been so driven and hungry. And speaking of unbelievable stories, Team Canada with Crosby, MacKinnon, Fleury, everyone else loses to the Danes. Denmark wins on home ice, probably their biggest international victory. They at this point, they'd be saying ever. Shocking Team Canada, who, with the players they had there, really had no excuse to not walk to the finals. So congrats to the Danes. Honestly, unbelievable story. Like, that's, we talked on a recent episode, that's the kind of stuff that makes the World Championships, like, when there are great moments, that's what they look like. No, it's not best on best, because the best players often are still playing in the playoffs, but what a phenomenal story for the Danes. That was unreal.
It's games like this that get remembered for a long time, and it's games like this that only happen once every 5 to 10 years, but it's the reason I want the World Cup of Hockey to be a big pool. Like, not 4 teams, not 8 teams. Get 12 to 16 teams in there. Most of the time it'll be a laugher, but every time it happens, it's an awesome story. It's a feel-good story. People remember it forever. Like, people still talk about Belarus over Sweden in the quarterfinals in, what was that, the 2002 Olympics. Like,
who is talking about that, Brad? Who do you hang out with?
Brad just talked about it right now.
And every time a game like Denmark just had comes up, people bring it up. They're like, oh, this is the biggest upset since. Go to the last one or go back the last couple. And since this one's happened in our lifetime, it gets brought up in these situations a lot.
Latvia, this most recent World Juniors, same deal.
We don't remember that, Max. That's okay.
Yeah,
we can skate past that.
Canadian World Juniors and Team USA Four Nations had a lot of the same ailments in terms of roster selection. It was funny. I'm far from a Kyle Dubas defender, but there was people saying, oh, a Kyle Dubas team fails again. And I was like, if your team has Sidney Crosby, Nathan MacKinnon, Marc-Andre Fleury, and whoever else, that is not the GM's fault for this, flash in the pan tournament. That's on the bench and on the ice.
It was a goalie game. Denmark's goalie just came up big. Sometimes that happens. That's a beautiful thing about hockey.
Can't wait to see what Azerbaijan has against Canada in the upcoming IHF or Olympic hockey. See if there's any big names coming up through the ranks.
The Swedes take home the bronze medal, which means Lucas Raymond, Erik Gustafsson, Simon Edvinsson get a medal. I thought the picture of Raymond was funny after they lost in the semis, where he just had his Mo Seider face on, where he was like one of the 3 best players for Sweden in the tournament, and he would just had this depressed face. I'm like, yeah. Red Wings experience continues. Same as Seider.
Seider one was gutting because that was a head-to-head with them in Denmark to see who would go to the quarters. I think they led that game at one point, didn't they?
And then you think about what Denmark did to Canada, and he has to be watching that going, could have been us.
Gutting.
The Swiss deserve a ton of credit. I mean, kind of wrote them off last episode of, okay, I mean, if Denmark wants to make a run of this, the Swiss are probably one of the better opponents to be facing. I think maybe a little too slept on there in terms of how well they do in international hockey, deserve recognition. And for guys who aren't, like, that's a team that really comes together for international play.
Roman Josi helps.
Yeah,
they have guys, Meyer, Heischer, like they're a sneaky Siegenthaler. They're a sneaky good international threat. I mean, they went to overtime in the gold medal game. They're a sneaky medal threat for the Olympics, I think.
That'd be a wild story. Okay, the NHL, the Stanley Cup Playoffs. I'm sorry because I like the Carolina Hurricanes, and I thought what they did to Washington was impressive, and I was like, you dispelled a lot of notions this season about who is actually the fraud. But I've not seen an Eastern Conference final so lopsided, unexpectedly lopsided in a long time. They're getting walked. They're getting dummied. They're getting completely bullied. The Florida Panthers are dictating the pace of every game, the physicality of every game, and it's older brother noogieing the younger brother for 60 minutes.
Well, we've seen this before, and it's been every other time the Carolina Hurricanes have made the conference finals since 2006, because they're on a 15-game losing streak now in the conference finals or something insane like that. It's well into the double digits. I mean, I don't know if we overestimate the Hurricanes or underestimate how bad the Metro truly is to get through that division. Here's the thought that went through my head watching a bit of that game last night. And you guys can agree, disagree, but this is where my head's at. The Carolina Hurricanes currently are the late 2010s, early 2010s San Jose Sharks.
I don't know about that, though, because the Sharks, I think, had guys who should have been enough to propel them forward. You think about Prime, Thornton, and Marleau, and all those guys, Nabokov, like the Sharks, I think, just played against some unbelievable teams in the West. The Carolina, I'm not discounting Aho and Svechnikov, but Carolina lacks the kind of top end, which is part of what ails them, at least in this series so far. When you have your own fans chanting shoot the puck, and then the opposing fans ironically chanting shoot the puck at you, that's got to be a gut punch.
Of all teams to be accused of not shooting the puck enough, these Carolina Hurricanes.
Ryan makes a good point, though, and I think what the Hurricanes need is a guy like Mikko Rantanen, just to put him over the top.
Dude, the amount of times that script has flipped. Carolina, I good for you. It didn't work out with Mikko Rantanen there. You realized you didn't want to sign there. You flipped him, and then you said all the things after, which you definitely do to galvanize your guys who wanted to stay. Like, we want guys who want to be here. We want guys to play our way. You have to say those things, of course. Unfortunately, there is another side to it if that coin doesn't land where you want it to, and they're eating that right now. Like, I think it was Taylor Hall said, like, we want guys who play our way or who want to be here. Well, Mikko Rantanen is playing how he wants to play right now, and I mean, Dallas might be facing a tough comeback against Edmonton here, but he is the Conn Smythe winner if Dallas wins the Stanley Cup, and Carolina is, like you said, they're lacking a Mikko Rantanen.
Can I tell you guys a crazy stat I saw about Carolina and another team? The Buffalo Sabres have won a game in the conference finals more recently than the Carolina Hurricanes. This is the fourth conference finals appearance for Carolina, and Buffalo hasn't been in the conference finals since 2007.
Wow.
The iPhone wasn't out the last time. Like,
I was still in high school.
And I mean, the ultimate answer to this, which is at least like 30% true, up to 90% true, is maybe Florida is just that good. Because what have we been saying about Florida for the last 2 years? This team was built in a lab for playoff hockey. They have all the right pieces playing all the right ways, coached by the coach who keeps them consistent and within those bounds and adjusts, and they have Bobrovsky rising to the task. Like, what if it's just that Toronto was actually the second or third best team in these playoffs and Florida was just undoubtedly number one, and Carolina's
You
not?
should just run it back then.
That it's kind of that every year they find a way to bring that do we just run it back narrative up, and the Leafs are kind of doing it again. The only thing that will stop them is I don't think Marner is interested in that. I don't know, man. Florida's, even if Edmonton gets through and they do it easily, I think the only thing that would hold Florida back at this point is 11 days off and he'd be rusty, but Kachuk's hurt. 11 days off would probably help them because he'd be even more healthy for the Cup final. They're up 3-0 in that series, so you don't know what's going to happen, but we all kind of know what's going to happen here.
I want that rematch bad. I think especially the way that it played out last year, where Edmonton found it as the series went on and fought back to a Game 7. I think you start it fresh in a Game 1. I think that would be just a phenomenal rematch. And I'm not usually a rematch guy in those situations. I think it can get a little boring. This one I really want to see.
Have we talked about, Carolina kind of being a blueprint for the Red Wings, like no true, we'll say superstars, but it's do it by committee? Like, does that worry you guys at all? I don't know if that's actually the Red Wings blueprint, but you kind of see it right now.
Brother, of all the things on my worry list with the Red Wings, it's there, but it's way down the list.
Okay.
There is something to be said, though, for what you're talking about, right? Like, of all the successful teams in the league, if you're going to say who's the team that gets there with it, I think Dallas would be 1-2. Like, I don't think Dallas has like a true superstar. It's maybe Heiskanen. I guess now they have Rantanen. But for the last several years, you've been able to say that about both of those teams. Their number one centers, Sebastian Aho and Rope Hintz, would be in the same tier as Dylan Larkin. Some people might have him above. I would probably have Larkin at least even with both of those two guys, but you can make the case either way, but they're in a tier, right? You know, two teams that are built, I would say, in large part on their blue line, and that's less true of Dallas now. I think they're very deep offensive, forward group now, but Carolina certainly historically has been built around Jacob Slavin, and when they lost Brett Pesce, you have Brent Burns, and they got Nikishin on the way. Like, Detroit's got some stars on the blue line, so I think there is something to that. I think those Dallas and Carolina are the two optimistic paths.
Well, I think Dallas might be the interesting comparison because the one big similarity I see between them, obviously, they've got Heiskanen on the defense, and I'm not saying Edvinsson or Seider are as good as Heiskanen, but they have the stud blue liner in place. But they had that interesting old core to new core, and they're really thriving under the new core, the Hintz, the Robertson, while still having the old core there in Ben and Seguin, which I think is the most likely path to Detroit being good. Jamie Benn is definitely not at the height of his powers right now, but he's still a useful player. That's probably where Dylan Larkin's going to be by the time the Red Wings are in this position, if they get there. And it's the Kaspers, Danielsons, Seiders, Raymonds, Edvinssons that are carrying the team at that point. That's probably the best one-to-one comparison I can maybe find to a contending team. And then you do have to go out in free agency and get a Rantanen or something like that, or via trade, but that's doable.
We're going to jump over to the West now. Edmonton, Dallas, we've talked about a couple times. Edmonton is leading 4-1 in the third period, 13 minutes left. Not that Dallas hasn't already had an unreal third period and stolen a game, but let's assume Edmonton holds that. They control the balance of the series so far, and that's a big assumption. We'll update as the game wraps up and we're recording here. Edmonton looks like they are finding it as they go, as Max said they did in the finals last year. Brad has talked about this year. They are kind of doing that. Matthias Ekholm gets healthy, and are they going to get shut out Stuart Skinner, or are they going to get 5-6 goals against Stuart Skinner? It seems to be feast or famine for him these playoffs. The heart rates or lack thereof of Oilers fans has to be like a medical emergency in the province of Alberta right now. But I mean, if this is one of those rare games where he just allows one goal and they hang on, like, Edmonton seems poised to as long as nothing goes wrong, and the Dallas Stars are still an unreal team. Like, I truly believe these are the two best teams in the West to come out of these playoffs. Like, Edmonton looks poised to make that matchup happen in the Cup Finals, the rematch. And very quickly, some NHL news here. It looked like Brendan Shanahan was almost going to be the president of hockey ops and maybe GM for Patrick Waugh on Long Island, and that would have been just a beautiful thing. I wanted that so badly. They bring in Darsh from Tampa Bay instead to be their GM, the Islanders, which I think was a pretty shrewd move. The Tampa Bay tree is continuing to be plucked by other teams looking to reform their organizations. But the big news here as well is Brendan Shanahan is out as the president of hockey ops leading the Toronto Maple Leafs. I joked with Brad and Evan, I think the last Patreon exclusive, Brendan Shanahan, my favorite player of all time. And did he absolutely leave that Toronto Maple Leafs organization in better shape than when he found it? For sure, no doubt. And you read his farewell letter, his statement, it's emotional. Absolutely. That's why you don't leave. He wasn't a Red Wing when he retired, but going to the Leafs, I was like, meh, that's what you get for betraying the memory of my youth as my favorite player of all time. All sincerity, though, I think Brendan Shanahan will get a job elsewhere, and I imagine it's just a matter of who wants to be the next Toronto Maple Leafs. We need to reform everything team. I wonder actually about Buffalo too.
Well, and Keith Pelly of MLSE said he's not going to look for another president in the interim here. So that's an interesting kind of change of the guard element to all this too, is, not only are the Leafs moving on from Shanahan, as it seems like it's Brad Treliving's show, or I guess maybe even Pelly's show.
And it sounds like coaching there as well with Craig Berube has has some more influence and authority as well. Honestly, I maybe I'm just old school and this is what we grew up with, but I believe in this more than this whole president of hockey ops managing a GM. It's messy and it just feels like more of a creating space for the guys who should be phased out, because hockey is the old boys club and no one ever wants to just say no to these guys and phase them out. Maybe one day it'll work, but I just think you're way more likely to get the too many cooks in the kitchen situation. We saw the whole Dubas had a trade in line to bring in Brendan Hagel and Marc-Andre Fleury to Toronto for a deal that had Nyes and first-round picks and whatnot in there. And debate, though we will, about the whether that trade would have been shrewd at the time. Like if Shanahan is vetoing that and Dubas thinks that's a great trade, that's a problem for an organization. So it really casts light on why Dubas was happy to leave in the end and why a lot of the comments he made were what he made. Like sticking around there, it felt like insanity. I still think Shanahan stayed for 1 year longer than they should have kept him.
Yeah, I think that's why you're starting to see more of those power dynamic conversations when coaches and GMs interview for teams. Like we saw with David Carl, like he wanted control over who would be on the team and make roster decisions. And you saw that with Kyle Dubas, like him and Shanahan did not agree down the stretch philosophically on the direction of the team and how to sign players and how to move on from guys. So I think you're going to see it more, and it just makes that working relationship more difficult, I think.
All right. That's enough on the NHL news side of things. Why don't we get into prospect profiles here? And for this one, we're going to pick a player that Max actually just wrote an article on, and a player that a lot of Red Wings fans will be familiar with because he plays for the Windsor Spitfires just across the Detroit River. We'll put a link in the description of the episode to Max's article. But Max, talk to us about Jack Nesbitt, left shot center out of Windsor, big body. Where's this kid at in terms of the rankings, in terms of where he's most likely to go? Could he be a fit for Detroit? And what kind of player is he?
Well, 13 would be a little high for me, but I think he's a guy who you could see go in the late teens or early 20s. Kind of a throwback player is the sense I've got. I've seen him live a few times. I was at his Game 7 in Windsor that ended his season. I thought he was one of the best players on the ice, and then later find out he was playing sick, playing through strep throat. That's pretty impressive to have the game that he had from what I saw and not be at your best. I do think he's got some jam to him, and I think that's a dying breed a little bit. I don't think he's going to be your leading scorer or anything. Obviously, we're talking about a guy who's probably going to be picked in the late teens or the early 20s. That shouldn't be the expectation. But a 6'4" center who you can trust defensively, who's got some pretty solid hands, and who will finish his checks, that's a nice player. The question is the skating, and it's not pretty. But you often hope with big guys that as they're able to add muscle, that looks a little more fluid. I think I wasn't able to exactly pin it down, but I think he had a significant growth spurt of, I think, around 4 inches or so when he was right around the age of 15. Obviously, it's, growth spurts doesn't happen in one day. But that's another mitigating factor is like, my skating would look weird too if I grew that much in a year or so.
Yeah, the optimism there is also the pessimism there for me, because not one-to-one comparisons, but a lot of what went right and what went wrong with Michael Rasmussen at the NHL level, I can draw some comparisons here because we've seen the improvement in Michael Rasmussen's skating. Like, it's easy to forget because he's one of the better skaters on the Red Wings now. That was his biggest criticism coming out of junior, was he was very heavy in the feet, and people were wondering, was he going to be able to keep up at NHL pace? And it turns out that wasn't the issue. It was his just general offensive IQ, which I think is a little better with Nesbitt, but not a ton. Like, you get these big guys in junior who have skill and who really know how to use their body. And I think that is the strength of Nesbitt. He's one of the big players who does utilize it well. But is that going to work against men? Being strong in the NHL is not the equivalent of being strong in junior. And obviously at a 6'4" frame, you work out, you fill out, he can be fine in that. But there are not a lot of Michael Rasmussens in the sense where a guy that size gets that much improvement in his skating at that age. He is the exception to the rule, not the norm. So I like the player, but he's more like early to mid 20s for me. So not a guy I would be considering at 13. Can't say never, because I think when the Red Wings picked Rasmussen 9th, I had him 23rd, so it's possible. But yeah, I like the player, but I worry about if the skating doesn't come, how is he going to succeed at the NHL when he can't out-physical everybody?
I think it's interesting, too. We talk about Rasmussen in a Red Wings context that's invariably colored by the fact that Detroit took him at 9th overall. He's the 18th highest scorer in his draft class. If Detroit had taken him at 18th overall and he was scoring at exactly that level and he's a plus defensive player and he were more physical, you'd be very happy with that at 18th overall, right? And so I'm not saying Nesbitt will turn out exactly like Rasmussen in the skating department, but I think if you do believe in that, then you say, okay, so if you took him at 18 and he scores around that neighborhood and he's more physical and he's as good defensively, well, yeah, then I think late teens sounds about right. Again, the Red Wings aren't picking late teens, so this probably wouldn't be the one that I would pound the table for. But I think that's the reason that he could go in that neighborhood, is if you believe that the skating comes, that's the package you're talking about, and that's how I would relate it to Rasmussen.
And ultimately, I think that's where I land on him. He's a perfectly fine player, especially for those late teens, anywhere in the 20s. I see the tools there where he could end up being, a player who is surprisingly effective in a top 6, if that's the higher end of his projection. But the lack of other kind of dynamic elements that really inspire confidence that he could overcome the poor skating, that to me is where you just can't spend that much draft capital in my mind to bank on that. Maybe the physicality and his drive and his compete are what help propel him. Like, you don't need to be a good skater to be good in the NHL.
I mean, Mark Stone's a horrible skater, right? And he's one of the very best forwards in the NHL.
That's right. But he's also got one of the best hockey brains on the planet.
Absolutely. And sticks, yep.
Yeah. And so I with Nesbitt, I'm not saying he's got no hockey IQ, but that's just not one of the standout elements of his game in my mind. And that's fine. Like, I don't think Tyler Bertuzzi is a particularly high hockey IQ player, but he had enough compete and drive to get to the dirty areas and be effective offensively. Mind you, the guy could not hold a system for his life if you ask a lot of Red Wings or Red Wings staff, but still, he can be effective on the ice. All this to say, skating isn't the be-all, end-all of every single prospect, but I just think on balance, like, Nesbitt is a great player for all the reasons Max and Brad listed, but for the Red Wings blood, probably too rich. Shame, because I want to see the Windsor connection. I think that'd be really cool. I hope to see that come about again soon.
Yeah, I think there's more projectable guys at 13 than Jack Nesbitt. Like, you're making the big gamble that he grows into his frame and can really, take the skills to the next level and really develop that skating. And I just think there's guys who are going to be there at 13 that are going to be already far more projectable. Like, they've already got the skill set. Like, we talked about Brady Martin. He may, at this rate, isn't even going to be there, but I see him and I see, yeah, this guy, I know where he's going to be in the lineup. But with Jack Nesbitt, I'm like, he has to do X, Y, and Z for him to get here. And if he doesn't, he's going to be third line, fourth line, maybe not in the NHL. I like what he does at the OHL level for Windsor, but at 13, that's a big gamble you're going to be making.
Yeah, and we've talked about how in this class there's a big drop-off after, you could pick your number, if it's 14, 15, or 16, how many guys you really like, but he's probably not in that group. But he's right in the mix once you get to that next group. And that's why I think as early as late teens, this would not surprise me. But again, that's not where Detroit is.
All right, let's jump over to another topic here. And this is probably our first circle back on a prospect, not necessarily in Detroit's range, but maybe. Max, you and The Athletic, Victor Eklund dropped in one of the mocks there. And I've seen the kind of notion that Victor Eklund could be a guy who, through no fault of his own, but just circumstance of other teams taking players that fill needs for them or gambles on a Brady Martin type or a Roger McQueen type, that Victor Eklund could be a talented top 10, maybe higher level player that falls to 13. How viable do you think this actually is? And is that an automatic hit the red button, draft Victor Eklund, sprint to the stage if you're Steve Yzerman and the Detroit Red Wings?
I think it's possible. Like, I think about the number of prospects that we've talked about, even just the four of us, that it's like, this guy would be great. And then he slips into the teens, right? Whether that's Zach Benson, whether that's Jonathan Lekkerimäki, Joakim Kamel. Like, you could probably find one or two guys of this profile every year who are a skilled, smaller winger. Maybe they have some other traits too. I think one of Eklund's best traits is his compete. But teams, for a number of reasons, don't tend to like to use really high picks on smaller, skilled wingers. Well, here you are at 13. In the past, you've used your high picks. You've passed up on those guys to use your high picks on the projectable two-way centers. Here's your chance if this guy falls, and I think it's very possible based on history and just based on the teams that are picking there. There are a couple right in front of Detroit that it could get dicey with, right? Like, I don't know that New York's picking them, but could it be Anaheim or Pittsburgh? I think either of those could make a good amount of sense. If he gets past those teams, though, like, it is a great conversation. Is it a run to the stand thing? For me, I think it would be, because I think he's a guy I would have considered taking if the Red Wings had been picking like 8 or 9. You know, the draft class evolves, and so I'd have to reassess that. But back when it was late in the season, and I was thinking, like, where do the Red Wings need to pick to get a guy that I feel like really, really good about? It was kind of around 8 or 9, and he was one of those names. That was before Brady Martin kind of made his surge. So maybe he fits more at like 9 or 10. But again, at 13, I think you'd be really, really happy with him. The only question is, again, another smaller winger. But just like we talked about with Marner, you can't plan on Patrick Kane being in this top 6 forever. So especially from that standpoint, this system could use the sizzle. He's a great skater. He's a competitive player. He can rip the puck. I think he'd be my kind of best case scenario, so to speak.
With him, he doesn't play small. Like you mentioned, his compete. Like, he plays a dogged game, and that's not at the sacrifice of skill. So I did kind of the same thing, and I looked at him as a player. I'm like, does he answer the questions you need? No, I being a little bit more idealistic about who they'd want, but you're not going to get a Denoye down at 13. You're not going to get a lot of the other guys you're looking at, barring a trade. For you to get an Eklund type at 13 would be, in my mind, quite a steal. Same as ASP last year. You know, we were looking at ASP in the Danielson spot and flip those two, and that probably would have been a lot more close to what we were predicting. So, yeah, the theme of this whole offseason apparently is beggars can't be choosers. And if pick 13 doesn't answer a question you have in your top 6 or with your forward group, okay, what's it to say that was going to be the only place where you could answer that question? Pick 13 is probably not going to be here soon enough to answer that question in your forward group in the amount of time that most of the fans are thinking about. So worry about that in a different way and look at pick 13 right now for what it could gift you with. And if it's Eklund, that's amazing.
There's also a clear distinction between the questions and the holes you have on the NHL roster and the questions and the holes you have in your pipeline. The hole in the NHL roster is you don't have size, you don't have like playoff meanness, that kind of stuff. In the pipeline, though, you have Branson Nygaard, you have Danielson. I'm not saying Danielson's the meanest guy in the world, but he is a 6'2" center. He plays a really good 200-foot game. What you lack in the pipeline is the sizzle, and you don't really have that. I mean, you have Amadeus Lombardi, but I don't think that's the same level as Victor Eklund. So what you have in the NHL team would say, yeah, you need the Sam Bennett type, the gritty, big size. What you need in the pipeline actually is more like a Victor Eklund.
Well, that's going to be our first pipe dream for this draft preparation. I mean, at no point last year did we ever say Zeev Buium was going to get even close to Detroit, so that the pipe dream could come out of left field, but Victor Eklund is first on that list, and that's a player I think we're going to be crossing our fingers for. All right, we are going to take a final break here before the final segment here on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Back after this.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to join the Dub Dub Club and get access to Thoughts with Evan, nothing else matters. Kidding, the overtime episodes, the bonus episodes, the giveaways, the Discord, all that and lots more. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. With many thanks to our patrons. Let's start reading their questions. Michael Berry says, if you believe expansion is coming, does that make it easier to sign more expensive deals as Atlanta or Houston would need to pick a player off the Wings roster? I don't think you can look at it that way. First, I think the NHL has talked about wanting to stagger expansion, so they wouldn't do 2 and 1. So you'd be losing one player off your roster, and teams aren't just going to take your bad contracts. You're more likely, they would rather take a league minimum guy and just waive him kind of thing. So you wouldn't use that to factor into contracts. The rising cap is more cover for bad deals. Michigander in LA says, hey guys, I've been having a debate with one of my friends about this. Can a rebuild be successful if you don't win a championship? And if the answer is yes, what's the bar for success?
I think so. I think if you told me that, and granted, we just talked about Carolina, and I'm sure people there are disappointed, but if you are a perennial, if you're giving your fans hockey into late May or early June, I know we've become a rings society, but that's like, those are still foundational things. Watching playoff games, that's how your fan base identifies with you and builds like core memories. Like, people will probably say like, oh, well, if you don't win it, I played a whatever. I watched to win championships. And I get that there's kind of that tough guy mentality that like, oh, if you're not an absolutist on that, you're not a real fan. But I think like going on deep runs and making multiple conference finals, you're clearly a contender when you do that. Carolina's clearly a contender. And even if they don't win a Stanley Cup, I don't think anyone can say that they didn't have, their build wasn't a successful build. It just kept running into a wall. And yeah, it won't be remembered in the same way that Colorado's was. But Colorado also hasn't been back. Like, I'd take Colorado's end of it for sure. The ring is forever. But they're both successful.
Jack's dads says Marner, Bennett, Ehlers, Gavrikov all would be great, but we have a lottery's chance in hell of landing any of them. Marchand and Tavares would be great, but they're old and likely to sign with playoff contenders or their home team. What about Morgan Geekie? Stats look okay. AAV could be reasonable, even at a slight overpay. If all else fails, Athanasiou, Fabry, and Mantha are all UFAs. Not a bad shout.
One on the joke end of that, I actually think Mantha could be dirt cheap as a depth scoring option coming off an injury-plagued year where he barely played. He's not going to cost you a lot. So I actually wouldn't hate that as a depth piece. But Geekie strikes me as that guy who had an okay career, wasn't doing much, exploded one year on playing big minutes on a weak team. He going to produce like that if he gets bumped down the lineup in Detroit like he would be? Probably not.
What you would have to probably give up to get him asset-wise would be more of a deterrent to me than anything contract-wise with Geekie. I think that's the bigger... If he was like a true free agent and you thought you could sign him on like a 4-year deal, yeah. But that's not all it takes to get a player like that when they are an RFA.
Motown Seider says, how important is it for Raymond to be effective playing on the left side? Thanks and enjoy your summers. Left versus right, any kind of ambitions about one being necessary?
I think he's effective wherever you put him, to be honest. Like, you either put him on the left and he opens up for what's a really good one-timer, or you put him on the right where he's been and he's an excellent playmaker. Like, yeah, it's important for Lucas Raymond to be effective wherever you put him. He's one of your most important players. He has to be effective wherever he is, but I don't have any concerns that he'll be able to do that.
Yeah, he'd be fine there. It's just, where are you maximizing him? I think he's got one of the stronger dragon release shots on the team, which favors his strong side. He's one of the few plus playmakers they have that favors him playing on his strong side. I think he'd be fine on his off wing, but I think he's best served on his strong side.
Their Canadian That's How says, this is a question for all of you. Why isn't Cullen Potter getting more love? Most have him as a late first-round projection, but as someone that's seen him play in person at least 15 times, it's my opinion that he's Dylan Larkin 2.0. He played on the number 2 team in the NCHC as a 17-year-old for most of the year, and against the strongest competition put up the following numbers. Western Michigan, 3 points in 2 games. Denver, 4 points in 5 games. Michigan, 2 points in 2 games. He's a high-intensity, strong two-way player who skates fast and his hands that can only be described as silky smooth. Also has an above-average shot with leadership potential that might not have a ceiling. If Detroit took him at 13, I wouldn't be sad. He's a lot closer to 13 than he is to 33. In 2031, when Max, Corey, Scott, and Chris are collaborating on a 2025 redraft, he's going to be a top 10 pick. Thoughts on Cullen Potter?
Bold. I like Cullen Potter. A lot pops when you watch him. He's a great skater. I think there's a lot of players that get compared to Dylan Larkin 2.0. It's kind of anyone who's a great skater who hasn't produced at the level that you want to see. And it's similar to how we compare every small center to Braden Point. That did happen once. How likely is it to happen again? We compared Oliver Moore as Dylan Larkin 2.0 for a while, right? And there's probably some rhyme there. So I like Cullen Potter. I think 13, again, little rich for me. He's probably in that next tier after the 14 or 15 that we talked about earlier for me. But I do think he's an exciting player. The speed is unquestionable. It's just, you talked about the point production against those teams, and that is really good production against those teams. I guess my response to it was, why did he finish the year with 22 points in 35 games? I know he was young in college. I'm not knocking it. But if you thought he was that level of player, wouldn't that have shined through more against all the teams that aren't Western and Denver and Michigan a little bit more? Like, not knocking him. I like the player, but I just think that would be my response.
Yeah, is the brain going to keep up with the feet and hands is basically the question with him, because the tools are undeniable. He's really, 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 really good. Is the hockey IQ enough to keep up with it? I'm a fan of Potter. I think I have him around 15, 16 on my personal ranking, so I don't think 13 is crazy. And the Red Wings are they do not play a fast brand of hockey, so he would at least help on that front.
91 to the Rafters says, looking at how the Tavares contract blew up Toronto's internal cap, would you worry about a Marner signing blowing up the Wings' internal cap, or is it hard to compare given the lack of cap increases through the Tavares contract and what the cap increases are likely to be from the next Marner contract? And I think the latter there is the answer to it. Maybe you have qualms about blowing up your team's internal cap by that many $1 million. Like, let's say Marner comes in for 13.5. Okay, you're clearing your internal cap by what, $5-ish million, give or take? Yeah, that's a lot. But the cap is going up by $2 quadrillion. Your internal cap's going to go away one way or the other. And it might be for Kyle Connor next year, you know?
Yeah, I think the reality of the situation, if you never sign another player north of $9 million, you're going to be awful forever. Like, you're just going to have to at some point. Otherwise, you're not getting anybody good.
The internal cap, you can argue, already served its purpose. You got the 2 deals done that had the potential to go past the 8.7. That's Raymond and Seider. Is it a little shitty? Could it be a little like, hey, what the heck? I'll say this. Mitch Marner is in a tier of player who can justify beating the internal cap in that way, right? For all of his wars, you can point to him and say, he had 100 points. It's arguably, we talked about the $10 million with Bennett. And again, I'll believe it when I see it. How much harder is it to justify going 1.3 million over your high water mark for a guy whose career high is 51 points? And I say that as a Sam Bennett lover. I think he would be a perfect fit. But if you're going to go that high money-wise, the production has to match it. That's a way harder. Now, I guess he's got the rings. So that would be the answer that you would probably say is, why does he get that much? It's because he's got 2 rings. But I think it's easier to say why Marner would clear that internal cap based on the statistical benchmarks and all that.
Tatai of Jersey Haver says, outside of maybe Danielson, is there another rookie with a better shot to make this team than MBN? Comes to Grand Rapids and is arguably their best player through an otherwise poor playoff performance, goes to the Worlds and shows up for Norway in a very similar way and plays the game in a way this team desperately needs someone to. Almost feels like a lock out of camp for me personally.
Well, it almost might come down to age and positional need. Does Kosa have a big camp? Do they consider that? Do they strike out on defense in free agency and Wallinder's the 7th defenseman? Like, there's other circumstances. Hell, Amadeus Lombardi is a dark horse. Not that he's better than any of the guys mentioned, but he's older.
Mazer is a rookie. I don't know if he counts in this pool because he's debuted. But
Yep.
All right. That is all on this episode of the Wind Wheel Podcast. We're going to be back with you midweek for more. Thank you to Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit for joining us on another Good in the Room episode of the Wind Wheel Podcast, which is why we were remote. I forgot to say that at the beginning. Again, congratulations to the Larkins and to the Toledo Walleye. Best of luck. We are going to say thank you to all of our sponsors of the Wind Wheel Podcast, to all of our Patreon supporters. We could not do this without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support us, but Patreon's not for you, wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe, leave a rating or review, whether it's the stars, the thumbs up. I'm bad at the whole YouTuber, like hit the bell button. Just do whatever that is. All that helps a ton. Tell a friend about the show. It all really does support us. And to our name level supporters on Patreon, we could not do this show without you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Jennifer Morris, Akefer, THL Champ, Samuel Surholm, Icon, Glenn Brabham, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Zuiza, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheeseback Navy, Alex Toger, Anna Sleeman, Asher Killian, Beer League Legend, Best James Bond, Bingo Bango, Brad's Only Feels Manager, Carl Brutinen Oluski, CB55, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Give Blood Fight Probert, Grand Rapids Girly, Griffin God Creatives, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Engels, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Mark Hernandez, Marty, Matt McKay, Michael Edlin, Mr. Kuzi, Now I Have to Learn How to Click on a Macintosh, Podgy713, RA, Richard Perkins, Roy Donk, Ryan Britt, Sam Bankson, Slim Smitty Cards, Stephen Hortlieb, That's What I Appreciate About You, Tiger McDougal, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Wings Fan in Chicago, Iser Plan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Andy Bohanna, The Cheesebag Army, A.A. Ron, All Motor No Hands, and Stanislavski, Axolotl, Sardine Pelican, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Busting It Down Like Evan on a Tuesday Night, C.E. Hayes, Chris Felinsky, Clay Adams, Commander Ben Brown of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Layton and Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Drop the Puck, Dylan Larkin, Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Evan Beckner, Evans Brown, Pomeranian, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Johnny Page, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, J.M. Rhapsody, Josh Yelchin, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Linda Hull, Lonnie Zone, Lucas Raymond, Marco Kasper, the Task Manager, Matt Keeler, Mitch Minier, No Grit, No Grind, No Shirt, No Shoes, No Cup, Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Rosie Posey, Roy Mudbutt, Ryan M., Ryan's Communal Hole, thank you for that, Reed, Steven, That Other Guy, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, our good friend, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Off for Evan to close out this game in overtime.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.